Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois, and we have got a great show for you today. It's a question and answer show today about lawns, turf grass, the place where we play bocce ball. Wait, no, not bocce ball. Croquet, that's the one I'm trying to think of. Golf, all the sporting activities. That's our lawns. And there's questions about that. And we're going to go through some of these common questions that seem to pile into the extension office around this time of year. And you know, I'm not doing this by myself. I'm joined, as always, every single week by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. I've heard of bocce ball, but I don't know. Is that something you play on grass?
No, I flubbed that one big time. Now you mentioned I have to leave it in. I was going to cut it out too. A bocce ball is usually played on like a kind of like a clay court. Usually that's what I've seen it, or pavement, some kind of harder, firmer surface.
Cut your grass real short, then you can do it.
Yeah, that's one thing. That'll be an option. You just create a putting green and there you go. You play your bocce ball. So I remember when I first started my previous life as a landscape designer, and these little bocce ball things were super popular in backyards. People were putting them in all over the place. I've never seen one, though I don't see them anymore. At least I would say they're gone. I think that phase left, but pickleball seems to be hanging on.
Pickleball replaced bocce ball.
I think it did. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, I guess let's do updates here, Ken. How are things going in your garden this time of year in your landscape? Anything fun and exciting with like decent spring rains? Actually, I have been in Jacksonville the last 2 weekends in a row, and it's been rainy both weekends. Guess what happens? Doesn't rain in Jacksonville at least when I've been there. So how's it been in Jacksonville?
Yeah, we've gotten some good decent rain. So enough that some of our raised beds have a little more clay in them than they probably should. They get nice crust on there. It's prevented that from crusting too much. So we've got our seedlings, our carrots and our lettuce and carrots are poking through. So luckily that crust hasn't prevented them from that. Peas are looking pretty good. Something came in and ate all of our artichokes.
Oh no!
I just found just a bunch of leaves in the garden. So luckily we have 6 more plants that we never planted that were going to be given to family, but they might not get any this year, depending on if the ones we planted pop back up. Mm-hmm. Our asparagus came in the mail end of April, which was a little later than I really was hoping for, but got that planted. So yeah, dug a couple of ditches and put it in there, and mm-hmm. It's kind of sore after that. Hadn't done that much digging in a while.
Asparagus season has been going hot and heavy recently, and so started a bit earlier than before. So I've been enjoying some good roasted asparagus in the oven here last couple nights.
So maybe in a few years we'll be able to pick some.
Or just exhaust your plants right off the bat and pick them right now.
I need to check to see if they're poking up yet. It's been a week since mm-hmm. they've been on the ground. So,
well, yeah, I think things are going. I mean, it is springtime. Watched our neighbor have a bridal wreath spirea. That thing has finished blooming. It was bright white this weekend, and I drove by this morning as I was leaving the house. The flowers have already started to fade. Bridal wreath has ceasing to bloom now. And so we are shifting now, I think, into the warmer side of spring, and which feels like we've been in spring since, I don't know, February. But that's kind of, where we stand for our weather. So I'll say back in my yard, what if I planted our cool season stuff a little late, of course, but got to get them in the ground. Got all my tomatoes hardened off and ready to go. Got some peppers ready to go. The one thing that I was excited about, I was really nervous that my eggplant wasn't going to germinate, because the germination requirements for eggplant, it's like 80 to 90 degree soil temperature. So I had heat mat going, and this is a specific type of eggplant that both you and I are growing, and also Emily. I got 100% germination. And so I was very excited about that. And we are going to, as long as it survives me and getting planted outside and all the critters, we are going to have eggplant this year, special a white colored eggplant. So I'm excited to try that one.
If you have an extra, I may need one. I don't know what to do with the seeds. Brought them home and they got lost.
Yes. Oh, I keep finding these seeds that we have been saying that we're all going to grow together, and I keep misplacing them. So we got to do a better job at this. I can get you on the eggplant, but some of these other ones will next year.
I think I've got all my other ones. I know where they're at. Just the eggplant I took home to start. And it's fell into the void somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think we've had a few questions and emails about the Good Growing Grow Along. People asking, hey, where's that seed? Hey, it's in the mail. It's coming. It's on the way. So just watch your mailboxes if you signed up for that. And they'll be ready to go. Now, a reminder for these are mostly direct seeded crops. And so this is not necessarily something you have to like get started indoors. I mean, I guess you could for some of them, but really you can just go out in the garden when you get them, plant them, and they'll start growing for you.
Yes, you should have got an email too on Monday.
Yep.
As well.
Yep. So watch your inboxes, watch your mailboxes. Seeds are on the way. Well, Ken, I guess we said we were going to talk about lawns, but we just talk about other things too. So we do have a couple these common questions as pooled through some of the emails and things that have come through and phone calls actually that have come in most recently. But these seem to be recurring every spring, maybe summer, throughout the growing season, but very common spring lawn care questions. I got a question for you, Ken. So this first one, they want to know, what do you think about this? So if you mow lower, does that mean you get to mow less? What do you think, Ken?
I'd say probably eventually, because if you keep mowing too low, too often, cool season grass is not going to like that in the summer, and you probably end up killing it. So eventually, maybe you may get to mow less often.
Great answer. Great answer. Yes, you kill your lawn, you don't have to mow it at all. So So the thing with our cool season lawns, I think for this episode, we're going to assume here on, we're talking cool season lawns predominantly is what's grown here in Illinois. I know some of you warm season people with zoysia grass are like, what about me? Sorry, we're going to focus on cool season because like 98% of Illinoisans have a cool season lawn. And so what species is that? That's it's turf type tall fescue, Kentucky bluegrass, perennial rye, the grouping of fine fescues. And, we're not talking about creeping bent grass, even though that is technically a cool season. That's what they use on golf courses and usually a weed when it gets into your yard. So we won't be referring to creeping bent grass. Please don't plant that in your lawn. Cool season lawns. So how high should we mow them? When you would go to say the internet and search that, and what Illinois Extension would say was a recommendation of a mow height of 2 to 3 inches. So that's after you've cut that lawn. Now, when we look at a lot of the research that comes out of turf specialists, experts, different land grants across the country, when we're focused on cool season grasses, they're really just saying mow as high as you can tolerate. Really, the higher, the better. So typically when I'm teaching classes about mowing and turf grass, I'm suggesting, folks, instead of 2 to 3 inches, going 3 to 4 inches for that final cut height. And then the question is, well, what about, when it gets dry, or what happens through first or second, last mowing of the year? I usually just say, just whatever height you have, just set it at that height. So then your root system has developed to support whatever that height is. And it's up to you. It's your lawn. If you like to play chip around a golf ball, if you like to run around, if you like to try to throw grounder baseballs to your kid or something, tall grass is not going to be conducive to that. So maybe you switch it up in some spots, but whatever mow height you select, set it to that. Ideally for our cool season grasses, 3 to 4 inches high. University recommends 2 to 3 inches high though, minimum, I'd say.
Yeah, for our lawn, we put the mower deck as high as it goes and go with that. Make it a lift kit for my lawnmower so I can make it higher. But
does Ken's lawnmower have spinning rims? A lift kit? Oh man, that would be sweet.
I don't know if that's a thing or not, but
should be. I bet it is. You could probably go on YouTube right now and find that. But a lot of people will come to me and they'll say, but if I mow lower, I get to mow less frequently. But again, if your final mow height is going to be half an inch to an inch tall, well, your lawn has if we think of this sort of like a tree almost, but I mean, they're plants. Lawn grass is plant. I can talk. I do think I can. Turf grass is a plant. It wants to grow to a certain height. Its genetics tell it that I must grow this tall. And when we allow it to gain some of that height that it naturally wants to have, it won't expend as much energy to try to recoup that lost leaf surface area, because a lot of folks will say, well, you know what I'll do is to help kind of recover in some of that energy when I cut it real short, so I'll fertilize. And yeah, fertilizer is a great like Band-Aid when it comes to some of those stressful kind of moments. But the thing that people think is like fertilizer is feeding the plants, but it's not feeding the plants. Fertilizer is not plant food. Fertilizer, I say it is a vitamin. It's like a vitamin to plants, just like how we use vitamins. It stimulates something in our bodies, like vitamin B stimulates metabolism, or the mitochondria in our cells or something like that. Gives us energy. And same thing for the fertilizer that we put on our plants. And it's important to stress that plants do not eat fertilizer. They eat sunlight. That's what they're hungry for, and that's how they make their food. And so fertilizer is a Band-Aid for the most part. It stimulates a response inside the plant, but it is not plant food. So you can't overcome that stressful situation with fertilizer long term. So yeah, just be mindful of that. Mow high, mow often, and keep your blades sharp. And that'll be the case. Yeah, that's the mantra we all have tattooed on our shoulders.
And if you're going to be going and cutting it short and then letting it grow up and then taking it back short again, typically you don't want to remove more than a third of that leaf blade at a time. So if you're cutting it short, let it get real tall and cut it back, you're just stressing it out even more. And particularly now that we're getting warmer, going into the summer months here, it's our cool season grasses are going to be going dormant if it gets warm enough and all that. And especially if it gets dry, you don't want to stress them out any more than you need to.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of long established research, that 1/3 rule. And it really started more as like a pasture management concept, hay management, straw management, things like that, where researchers were trying to figure out, well, how far do we have to cut these grasses in order to stress them, or maybe to avoid stress? What is that? And it's really, throughout that research and now translating into turf grass science is, try to avoid removing more than 1/3 of that leaf blade at any one mowing. So what happens if the lawn gets away from me? It has already done that for me this year. It's been rainy. We've been out of town most weekends, as I said. So you just raise your mower deck as high as it will go and you cut. And you'll have to wait a few days, knock your mower deck a little bit further down, or maybe hit your target mow or cut height, and then you mow again. But we've all been there. We've all seen what happens when we take like a 6-inch lawn that's gotten a little away from us and we knock it back down to 2 inches. It looks terrible for a couple weeks. And sometimes it's enough to stress out that lawn, cause disease. Weeds can come in and invade the lawn. So yeah, 1/3 mow height, mow often, mow high, keep your blade sharp. That's what we do.
Richard would be proud.
That's right. He would be proud.
All right. So our next commonly asked question: why don't more people bag their clippings to reduce thatch?
I've seen arguments erupt with this question. like at the cooler, the water cooler, or the coffee pot in the office. People start arguing about this. Mostly males with they feel like they need to have that immaculate lawn, and those clippings are contributing to maybe debris that accumulates in that lawn, which creates this thing called thatch. Here is a fun fact. Lawn clippings do not contribute to thatch for the most part. We could probably find exceptions out there, but for the most part, they do not contribute to thatch. When we cut our lawn, most of that leaf blade is water. Like 90% of that leaf blade is water. And so that is just going to evaporate. It's going to go away. A very small amount of that leaf blade is actual like tissue, cellulose, and a lot of it is nitrogen in there that will decompose and actually add nutrients back to our soil. What thatch is sort of lignified, which is sort of it's like a tougher woody, or not woody, it's like a tougher plant tissue. It resists breakdown, and it can build up over time. And usually this is more of an issue when we are dealing with like highly manicured lawns, golf courses, athletic fields. I mean, if you are paying someone a lot of money to maintain your lawn and have it look perfect, it's usually a case of over fertilization, over irrigation, just overstimulation of these grass plants. Also can kind of be a naturally occurring thing if you're I'll look at the warm season grasses, zoysia grass, which is also common thatch accumulator just on its own. So, but for the most part, you don't have to worry about thatch when it comes to your lawn clippings. So if anything, ideally, we would want to leave those clippings lay. You can mulch them, you can side discharge them, whatever it is. You just don't want them to clump up because, again, as those clippings decompose, they return nitrogen back to your soil, which is not the only, but it is one of the key nutrients for our grass plants because we grow them for their leaves, not their flowers, not their fruit. We grow them for their leaves, and nitrogen equals leaves.
Yeah, and thatch isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's good to have something that's going to add some cushion to that. It's going to help protect the crowns of the plant. So you don't want to have no thatch at all. It's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's a half inch. If you have more than a half inch of thatch, then it's an issue. Anything less than that, you're good. Actually, it's actually a good thing to have a little bit of thatch on top of your turf surface, which I don't have. And every time it rains and I walk on my lawn, I'm slowly killing it. And so I'm not protecting the crown at all because I don't take very good care of a lot of my lawn. That's unfortunate. So why are you even listening to me right now?
My lawn's more weeds than grass, so in most spots.
I call them flowers, Ken. I call them flowers.
In some spots, there is no grass. Just creeping Charlie.
It's true. It's true. Hey, I love creeping Charlie. It smells great when I cut it. So I might be alone in that. Well, Ken, did you know when the forsythia bloomed this year? I have a forsythia in my backyard, and I was not able to keep track, but because I cut it hard last year. I cut it back pretty hard. I don't have very many flowers on it this year.
Trying to remember, somebody close to us has a forsythia, but I don't know if I ever drove by or walked by when it was blooming.
Well, I think we kind of had a funky spring where it could have been variable. I mean, our magnolias didn't bloom at all in my neck of the woods. And so I don't know if there was issues with that. But another common question we get is I should put down my weed and feed, which is like a crabgrass preventer / fertilizer when our forsythia are blooming. I don't know, good or bad advice. What do you think about that? Considering we don't even know when the forsythia bloomed this year.
Yeah, some years it may work, some years it may not. You're probably better off monitoring soil temperatures if you're going to try to control crabgrass.
It's like this guy studies this stuff, he's really smart. So yeah, it's like soil temperatures. That is the trigger for crabgrass germination. It's not necessarily forsythia blooming, though the phenology of the world, phenology is the study of like how the timing of natural things as they process throughout the season. That's a good measure for some things. And like Ken said, sometimes it would work for crabgrass preventer. Some years it won't work. The most reliable thing is to look at soil temperatures. And so when you get a soil temperature above 55 degrees for 5 to 7 consecutive days, you're going to start getting germination of crabgrass seed. And we had that in like March. I don't know if it was early this year. Most people try to have their crabgrass preventer down in April 1st in my neck of the woods, and they might have been too late this year.
Yeah, and even when you're putting that down, all the crabgrass isn't going to germinate right then. It's going to take, by the time your weed part of your weed and feed wears off, there's still probably going to be stuff germinating. So that's not a foolproof. You may have to go back and do some more, or just embrace the crabgrass.
Just mow it like the rest of the grass. I love that. Oh man, but people really do get sensitive about crabgrass for some reason. I mean, it has that prostrate growing habit, sort of just like Moses parting the sea of green there, and it's just splayed out. Everybody sees it. I've heard, people that will like in the middle of the night, they'll go out with a shovel and they'll dig out the crabgrass out of their yard, and they think like, oh, I fooled everyone. And then during the daytime, they realize looks like little bombs exploded throughout their yard where they dug it all up. Lawn care does not have to be this stressful. That's why we invented lawnmowers, so we can just chop it all back.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. The other big thing about weed and feed, I'm going to mention this. Ken's like, gosh, shut up already about about this grass stuff. So the other thing about weed and feed is Extension will typically recommend, if we can separate our pre-immersion herbicide from our fertilizer, that is going to be ideal. Weed and feed as a combination product, they are marketed as convenience products. So, hey, I'm going to do this one thing and it's going to do two things for me. Now, when it comes to crabgrass prevention, we typically, like I said, we want to have that down before soil temperatures hit 55 degrees. Usually it's around April-ish 1st. That's just kind of but that's not realistic. That's not a reliable date. So just be mindful of that. Forsythia, not always reliable. That April 1st date, not always reliable. Soil temperature is the reliable mark for us. But usually we have to get that down in order for it to be active in the soil. That's about a week or two. So again, read those label directions on those products. But why we want them separate is because if we put fertilizer down early spring, maybe even like late winter, our fertilizer has nitrogen in it, which stimulates vegetative growth. As I mentioned, nitrogen grows leaves. When we tell our grass plants and we stimulate that reaction in our plants to grow leaves in early spring, we are telling that plant also stop growing roots. So there's a lot of root development happening in March and early April. Those cool season grasses, they can sense things are warming up. They know they have to prepare for those hot, drier summer months. So they're focusing a lot of energy on root growth and development. And we throw nitrogen down too early. We say, stop growing roots, start growing leaves. And so there's not endless energy in that grass plant. It has to devote energy into what is happening inside that plant. So we stimulate vegetative growth too early, we sacrifice root development. So that's when we typically say, if you're going to do a spring feeding or fertilizer application, wait until after that initial flush of green growth, about a month or two after you've been mowing constantly, twice a week maybe. Once it starts to slow down, then you can do your spring fertilizer application to kind of help the plant rebound from any nutrient deficiencies it might have from all of that growth that just went through.
All right, so another common one we get is trees. So grass struggling to grow underneath trees, usually large shade trees, maples, oaks, evergreens sometimes, which I don't know what you do about that. How can I get it to grow and look healthy?
It's a tough one, Ken. Because usually I know what I would do. Um, but I guess maybe we should explain what's happening first here. Why is there a struggle between these two particular types of plants? Um, and what I see is very commonly so. Let's say we have an established shade tree. It's been there for decades, has a very established root system, and we then come in and want to try to grow grass in that soil. A few things we need to know about how both of these plants work is that trees don't have a very deep root system. When people think about the trees, they often think, oh, they have a deep tap root that goes way down into the earth to get water and resources. And that's not the case. Tree roots need to breathe oxygen. And so they are in the top kind of 6 to 10 inches of soil. I would say that range that I hear very commonly is 4 to 18 inches deep for those tree roots. So when you think of like a shape of a tree, think of it as a wine glass. So the canopy is the globe or the thing that holds the water. The stem of that wine glass is the trunk, and then the base of that wine glass is the root system. But imagine that base extending 3 to 5 times the width of that canopy, and you have the structure of a tree effectively right there. And so that tree roots are right there with those grass roots, and they are competing for resources in that soil. And if those tree roots are already established, guess what? They have priority. The grass roots are going to struggle to try to establish themselves and to find their own resources. The opposite I tend to find is true when we have new developed subdivisions and they cut down all the trees and they roll out the sod, and the sod has been growing there for years and years. It's well established. And then we plant these baby trees in this sod. The trees usually struggle to establish in those situations because, again, there's competition happening there. And at this point in the conversation, I asked the homeowner, well, what would you rather have? A nice, beautiful, lush lawn or a shade tree that might cool your home in the winter? It could add property value. That choice is really theirs. And they'll say, well, what if I want both? I say, well, you could try to seed some fine fescues underneath that tree. Now, fine fescues is a grouping of cool season grasses. So like red fescue, chewing fescue, magic's fescue, all of those. And they're the most shade tolerant of all of our cool season grasses. And by shade tolerant, I mean they still, to look good, still need to have at least 4 hours of direct sunlight a day, like direct, like the sun has to be shining on them. That doesn't often happen in the shade of a tree. So then again, the question is, would you rather have a lush, thick lawn or the shade of a tree? So what would you pick, Ken?
I'd pick the tree personally.
I knew it.
And that's one of those things where you want to have something on the ground, just look at a different ground cover. Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of shade tolerant ground covers out there. And if you want native stuff, you could look at the ginger, wild ginger. You do ferns if you want something a little bit taller, hostas, which I don't know, sometimes get a bad name in the horticulture world because everybody plants them, but they're still good plants. There's a lot of variety in colors and stuff. So there's a lot of options out there.
Yeah. I like hostas. They work well where the deer don't get them in my yard. And I don't know where they are, where I do plant them and the deer get them because the deer are pretty aggressive, even with 2 dogs. So I've been using sedges. So I've planted sedges under an oak tree in my backyard that have worked out really well. As Ken said, it was, the wild ginger, which we planted last year. And I'm so excited. They just popped out of the ground just now. And I'm like very excited to have them. You can do woody plants. Some of our azaleas, rhododendrons are more shade tolerant and more adapted to growing within that root structure of those trees. Then, some of our hydrangeas as well are also adapted to some of those situations. And so, and the other thing, Ken, you mentioned evergreens. That's the other question too. Like, oh, I want to get grass to grow underneath my white pine. Please save yourself the effort and just leave those needles there. They are an excellent mulch. They suppress a lot of weeds that would otherwise be growing there. And again, this is kind of a matter of opinion and aesthetics, but I like a full like a skirt on that evergreen tree. I like it being from that Christmas tree shape all the way down towards the base, towards the ground. And so I don't like limbing up evergreens. I just it again, that's a preference, and I could comment on the overall health, but that's more of a it's less scientific, it's more opinionated. But yeah, I would say try not to limb up your tree and enjoy the full form of that evergreen.
Yes, yeah, I would agree with that. And going back to your, I mean, you mentioned the pine needles, leaving them there. Another option would use mulch under your shade trees if you can't get anything to grow. You don't want other things, or if you still want to be able to use that, and not worry about trampling ginger or ferns or hostas or anything like that. Mulch is always an option.
Oh yeah, always an option. Yeah, you can mulch there. I've been sometimes I'll put impatiens and something like that in containers around underneath like dense shade areas, just to put a little more light. Caladium, like a white variegated caladium. That white color really pops, especially in those darker parts of the yard. So, yeah, don't try to fight nature. Figure out ways where you can work with it.
You will always lose.
Yeah. It's story of my life. Well, Ken, I have to ask you a question here about a particular type of grass. And this is something that comes in a lot. Like this is going to be confusing. So let's preface this next portion here. This is our last question. It's going to be maybe a little bit confusing at first. I'll do my best to explain. But Ken, a lot of times people come to me and say, I keep planting Kentucky 31 bluegrass. Kentucky 31 bluegrass. All right, I'm going to keep going. And they keep saying, it looks terrible. What do I need to do differently to make it grow well? Now, this is a trick question. So let's see what you got here, Ken.
Well,
totally trick question. Ken was not prepared for this.
Grow something different. Is this like a pasture grass?
Yes, it is. And it's not bluegrass. This is very confusing. Okay, I'm going to do my best to walk us through this here, okay? Kentucky 31 is not Kentucky bluegrass. A lot of people will see this and say Kentucky 31, Kentucky bluegrass. Just the brain makes that connection. But that's not what it is. Kentucky 31 is actually tall fescue, a pasture grass. And so that the thing with Kentucky 31 is you will often find this in farm stores. And I mean, at least where I'm from, in rural parts of the state, it will be in this big bin. It's just this big open bin. It says Kentucky 31. There's really no labels. There's no like anything that states the germination percentage, nothing, no purity stuff, none of that. It just says Kentucky 31. There's a scoop and there's a bag, and you fill the bag up. And again, people will think or assume that this is Kentucky bluegrass, or in fact, you're putting a pasture grass for your yard. And it's not even Kentucky bluegrass. It is tall fescue. Now, you might have heard me mention that there's a turf type tall fescue. So turf grass breeders have taken the pasture tall fescue, which does not make a very good lawn grass, and they've been breeding it for decades to try to mimic Kentucky bluegrass. They're getting pretty close. The leaf blade has gotten narrower, or kind of a finer texture like Kentucky bluegrass. It's gotten a darker green, kind of like Kentucky bluegrass, but it's still not quite the exact same thing. And that's fine. For most people, I think we wouldn't really bother us. But if you're kind of a lawn purist, if you must be manicured and uniform, it might bother you a little bit. So that is the issue in this case, is that Kentucky 31 is for pastures, and it's also tall fescue. If you want to put tall fescue in, you would want to search out a turf type tall fescue. And I did a good growing blog about this year or two ago. And I went to the NTEP, which is the National Turfgrass Evaluation Program results for tall fescue. And they ranked them at the end of their trial. And in that article, we give the top 10 varieties that NTEP recommends for turfgrass, turf type tall fescue. So I'll leave a link to that below in the description, and you can check that out. And I think Kentucky bluegrass trial results just came out this year too.
So you do grow something differently, or get some goats or cows.
There you go. Yeah, you just don't use a lawnmower. You have to use an animal to help you keep that down. Yeah. So you were right, Ken. You knew it all along. Well, that was a lot of great information about turfgrass questions, lawn questions. Well, the Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by me, Chris Enroth. Special thank you, Ken. Thanks for hopping on this Zoom call with me today. Kind of impromptu, and let me maybe give you a little trick questions there. So thanks for being here.
Hey, you're welcome. I'm not sure I contributed a whole bunch, but thanks for having me on.
I will. Hey, this is how when we're talking insects, I'm just sort of sitting back in fascination and watching. So that's the thing. Insects are interesting. The lawn is not. It's the joke. Watching grass grow, so it's not the most interesting thing.
Hey, it's all good. Let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. Speaking of bugs, we're going to be talking about monarch butterflies with probably the country's foremost expert on this topic. So that is going to be a very interesting conversation about monarchs and what is the most latest research out there. Probably heard about these smaller overwintering numbers. What does that mean? Do we need to do anything? What's the science say about this? It's going to be an eye-opening show, so you're going to enjoy it. So listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing.